So I want to talk about international regulation and approaches in ethics to human genetic modification. Bioethics is the love of life. It involves loving good, self-love, love of others, love of life. And relationships are critical in bioethics, and it's one approach to looking at these questions, including the questions of the relationships between parents and their children or future children. And that is very much the heart of human gene editing, is this relationship between parents and child to be. And so I would like to take from that approach. Now we have traditional ethics looks at balancing ethical principles which have been articulated to be doing good, which I call loving good, doing good, beneficence, not doing harm. Do we love life so much that we shouldn't do harm? When can we take a risk that our technology may cause harm? Individual autonomy. Do I have a right to take choices that I'd like to make? Or not? And Justice Darryl.
Morning.
Good morning, Agus. Welcome. And there's been a long heritage seen of these principles in biology, medicine, society, and religion. Bioethics is a new word framed in 1927 by a German pastor called Fritz Jahr. And his paper was called The Bioethical Responsibilities of Human Beings to Plants and Animals. So you may think, well, that's interesting, especially given that he was a Protestant pastor in Germany in 1927. It's a rather Buddhist approach to theology. But that's...
I always thought it was done on Steel Potter, so it was earlier.
Yes, Potter is English in 1970.
Yes.
But the Bioethics, Fritz Jahr wrote 8 papers in 1927, 1980,
Wow.
28 using Bioethics.
That's
So
new.
this is, well, we have new things today. But it's interesting because it also shows the colonialism of English language and the American ethos in the world that scholarship, academic scholarship, may be taken earlier. Of course, I think bioethics is pre-human, which takes us a bit earlier than even those cultures. So we'll talk again about this, but this ethics of balancing is critical for our discussions today as well. Love of life is a gift. The gift that we receive when we are born into the world is love. This is the essential human value for the 21st century, as it was for every century in the past. While love is a gift that few are deprived of, a deprivation that in itself is an insult to humanity that our flesh embodies, it's in the norm for all forms of life, for a new life to be given a good start. The ultimate gift that we can share with others is also love. Curing a disease is an act of love. Do you agree or disagree? We have some medical doctors in our prisons. Their work is an act of love. Do you agree? Old Chinese philosophy, medicine is the art of Jin. Yeah? Loving good. So the genetic lottery that we're born with presents parents and society with ethical dilemmas. It's in addition to the social and spiritual lotteries that we're born with. Both unconditional acceptance of a living being with love and attempting to cure disease are acts of love. Should these ever be made illegal? So this is a question to ask our lawyers and our doctors, and that's we've got this interdisciplinary dialogue with some philosophers and people to think about. Should ethics committees ever tell a doctor, you cannot save somebody from a disease? And the answer is, maybe sometimes they can. But under what conditions do we allow society to stop acts of love? Ethics and creative power. The history of bioethical reasoning is influenced by our genes and the forces that shaped and continue to shape these genes into the people, society, and cultures that we have. We now have the power to change not only our own genes, but the genes of every organism, and the power to remodel whole ecosystems of the planet. This has made many focus on biotechnology applications. However, the key questions are more basic. We have the technology to conceive an embryo in vitro, to mix genes from different persons, beings, and to offer life support to those whose body has temporarily failed. We have the power to remodel whole ecosystems of the planet. We can reshape life as a digital construct, even virtual life. New technology is a catalyst for our thinking about bioethics, which have been stimuli for research into bioethics in the last few decades. So, for those who study theology, is the image of God the ability that we are Homo creator, not just Homo sapien, Homo generator? Are we able to fabricate? Or is that part of the power of God? It's the power of God that we don't let sick people die. It's the power of God that we're going to improve and enhance our body. You've come to one of the cosmetic capitals of the world. You can look in the front page of a newspaper and buy a sex change operation quite easily in Bangkok. Is that creative? But also you'll see many people with challenges that need to be overcome. If we cannot clear up our environment from the ppm, larger and larger pollution particles of increasing parts per million size, maybe we just need to engineer more resilient lungs, more resistance to environmental toxins, and then we're going to be happy to live in mega cities instead of a forest. A fundamental way of reasoning that people have when making decisions is to balance good against doing harm. We could group these ideals under the idea of love through the question of benefits for whom and harm to whom is central to deciding whether an action is one of love or not. So there are several ways to view bioethics. Descriptive ethics is the way people view life, their moral interactions and responsibilities with living organisms in their life. The International Bioethics Survey, conducted in 1993 in 10 countries in Asia and the Pacific, found positive views towards genetic enhancement in China, India and Thailand, with less approval in the Philippines, Singapore, and a majority rejection of this in Japan, Australia and New Zealand. The questions regarding genetic screening and gene therapy suggest positive support for eugenics among a significant portion of the population, especially in China, India and Thailand. Of course, in other countries of the world I didn't survey, it may well exist as well. Less than 10% in all countries in the International Bioethics Survey saw science and technology as doing more harm than good. Overall, most people in industrialized countries around the world perceive more benefit than harm from science. Most people also believe that improved quality of life depends on scientific knowledge. So national centers of science and technology and development are fully supported by the population. The Indonesian Institute of Sciences, where Professor Agus comes from, is an institution built around the centrality of science to the country's development. and throughout prosperity. So we have this positive image. But we also now have national commissions of ethics and science and technology, as Professor Somsack is working on, and Nilton Brazil working on. So how do these balance this enthusiasm towards the therapeutic motivation? A second way to view ethics is prescriptive ethics, to tell others what's ethically good or bad, or what principles are most important in making such decisions. It may also be to say that something or someone has rights and others have duties to them. So we have normative ethics, we have law, we have policy, and these frameworks to tell us what we can and cannot do. Okay, so for example, there are limitations. Several years ago, if you wanted to employ surrogate mothers, you could come to Thailand or India and employ them without much restraint. But now there are laws to protect women and restrict such services, so people can go to Cambodia or Laos or Georgia or other countries in the world to use it until the laws stop them. So we have prescriptive ethics, we have policy. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights, which I'm sure you remember. Article 1 of both covenants starts, all people have a right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So if that is true, then I can make choices about science and technology. I can make choices about how I use my time, how I use the money I earn, and how I can use the connections that I have. Human rights is common language, so as a result, 3 sets of declarations were developed in the UN, in UNESCO. The first, the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights. The second, the International Declaration on Human Genetic Data. And the third, the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. So I had the privilege to be a member as an academic of the International Bioethics Committee from 1993 to 1998 of UNESCO. And for 5 years we drafted the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights. I had the privilege to be the youngest member of that committee. There were 50 people, and a lot of Nobel Prize winners, and I was young. There were some Nobel Prize winners who were 80 years old in the committee. It was wonderful. I could learn a lot from these people, and they were mentors. But I also felt some responsibility as a young person at that time towards the future. So some of you are younger than I now. You also have a great responsibility to offer voices of young people to the dialogue, because we're talking about the future. And some of the statements we made may be interesting for us because we can reflect on this question of prescription. When can the law restrict what we're doing? So in the 1993 to 1998, when we were writing the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights, one of the conditions we set as a group of 50 scholars and academics and philosophers was the declaration should not be bound by time. It should set out principles which would apply across time. So there was actually, even at that time, a movement by some people to say you should prohibit human germline genetic modification. But we resisted as a group of committee to that mention. And that's why there's no mention of a prohibition against germline genetic modification. It would have been very convenient. It was kind of popular. But the idea of that committee was it should be establishing something which works for decades, not something that we will change our attitudes as we see today because the questions are quite evolving. There was actually an add-on in that declaration, Article 11, to the principle that practice is contrary to human dignity, which is what the committee had left it. When the government experts met to finalize it in the July of 1997, they had seen the paper in Nature February 1997 of Dolly the sheep, and the governments of the world and the UN thought, we need to do something, so let's add the words such as human reproductive cloning into the declaration. But the committee was aghast. We were against that generally, because we'd specifically avoided including technologies into such document, because who knows, maybe it will be ethical, and that's one of the things we'll discuss. Another approach to regulation by scientists is self-regulation. So from 1995 to 2005, I was a member of the Human Genome Organization Ethics Committee. So it's a group of 12 people from different countries of the world, and we set a series of statements of how we might regulate human genetic research. And you can find these statements openly available, and they talk about certain aspects of technology, including human gene therapy. In 2005, the United Nations could gather for another declaration on bioethics and human rights. This is a common statement with 15 principles that might guide bioethics. So all 191 countries in the world agreed to the statement, but it's rather general. So these principles can be applied to particularities. There is no particularity in these declarations. There's no technique mentioned. It avoids animal issues, because animal rights cannot be agreed by all countries. It avoids abortion. It avoids euthanasia. It doesn't mention human gene editing. It doesn't mention cloning. It doesn't mention any technology, because again, the idea was a philosophy. Some of these examples from the Universal Declaration of Human Genome and Human Rights. What are the conditions for exercise of scientific activity? So some of us were scientists, some of us are still scientists, even though we might have moved to social science. Article 13, the responsibilities inherent in the activities of researchers, including meticulousness, caution, intellectual honesty, and integrity in carrying out their research, as well as in the presentation and utilization of these findings, should be the subject of particular attention in the framework of research on the human genome, because of its ethical and social implications. Public and private science policymakers also have particular responsibilities in this respect. So if you've worked in science, you must be meticulous. It means very careful. Do you know that when people try and replicate your science, generally about more than half that science cannot be replicated? Natural science as well as social science. It's kind of remarkable. So although as scientists we try and describe a methodology of what we do so people can replicate it, a lot of science is published cannot be replicated. So is it really meticulous in its action, or maybe in its description? Because life is quite complex. And in the following presentation, we have the honor to listen to somebody who's actually done gene therapy and has patients who are living proof that gene therapy can work. Despite 50 years of discussion in bioethics about gene therapy, not so many scientific trials have actually succeeded. So another example that might be relevant from the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights, Article 7. Genetic data associated with an identifiable person and stored or processed for purposes of research or any other purpose must be held confidential in conditions set by law. Okay, that's fine. But what say you have just done gene therapy on a baby and you want to publish a paper with the gene sequence of that person in a paper? When you publish a paper, isn't it a breach of confidentiality? Well, it is if you mention the name. But what are we going to do? We have to replicate, we have to study, we have to prove. And in Article 8, every individual shall have a right, according to international and national law, to just reparation for any damage sustained as a direct and determining result of intervention affecting his or her genome. So when you do a gene therapy on a baby, Article 8 applies. Who's going to pay compensation to a baby who a mutation occurs and they get cancer? Well, the National Health Service, luckily in Thailand, is going to pay for them. But in the United States, maybe there's no National Health Service to pay for them. Okay? Who's going to? There's a responsibility to just reparation, whatever that means. So these are clearly articles we considered. We spent 5 years with 10 drafts of this declaration, considering particularities of the science, and the words were chosen extremely carefully. Article 15 was also included. Conditions for the exercise of scientific activity. 15. States should take appropriate steps to provide a framework for free exercise of research on the human genome with due regard for principles set out in this declaration, in order to safeguard respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms and human dignity, and to protect public health. They should seek to ensure that research results are not used for non-peaceful purposes. Do you have a freedom of thought? Can you think whatever you'd like to think? Yes? Do you?
Think?
Can you think whatever you'd like to think?
I believe so. Maybe too much.
He's a philosopher, you see, he can't talk to anyone. Can I say whatever I want to say? Yes, I can, but it may get me in trouble. In fact, it could get me in prison. Can I research anything that I like? This is a statement about research. And UNESCO is arguing, well, yes, you can research anything you like. But we'll find maybe some areas, some governments might restrict. But the statement here is to protect, this section is to protect the freedom, the human right of freedom of thought and freedom of research. If we don't have scientists able to do research freely, we're limiting the love that they are able to share. A third way to view ethics is interactive ethics, is discussion and debate between people, group within society and community. Such dialogue skills are necessary to live harmoniously with others, and that's what we're doing in our forum. So an imperative of love, respect for the ethical principle of self-love, supports empowerment of people so they can access technology according to their values. Okay, so you can choose, you want to change your nose, your eyes, different parts of your body. Your freedom. What about for children and fetuses and embryos? This is the question. Can we make assumptions that they don't want to be sick? So freedom of expression is included in several of these Universal Declaration. Freedom to hold opinions without interference. So we can discuss. Somebody can argue that you can argue for eugenics, you can argue for enhancement, you can argue against it, you can argue whatever you like. It's a freedom. And this pillar of academic freedom is something we value strongly. It's critical to a healthy society and our intellectual progress. And we also should have a full discussion. So in forums like this, we discuss anything. And that's one of the privileges of bioethics, is to discuss everything. Diversity rather than dogmatism. A focus on respect for diversity of ways to meet our duties and facing our karma can make a more tolerant world than one that's judgmental based on ethical principlism of fundamentalist interpretations in any religion. So this may be what you call the middle way, or maybe this is a way of our dialogue. Have any of you used a photocopy machine? I have a PhD in photocopying. Yes? Some of you do, especially if you're social scientists and copy lots of papers, which you see in my office, in the office. Sometimes we change our society before changing people. Why is this photocopy machine designed this way? A life choice is accessible for people of different abilities. Technology and design for inclusion. People in wheelchairs can easily use this photocopy machine. If people can be cured to walk, it's still better. So I don't know if you have these photocopy machines. These are wheelchair accessible copy machine. Very simple to make, but it's not that well integrated. Even how do you access in a wheelchair to this lecture room? You can go around the back if you know where the side elevator is, and you can get in. But it's not obvious. So some questions for the day we maybe will answer. When is it ethical for the law to limit the act of love to attempt to cure disease? When applying the principle of to do no harm, who besides the parents can claim that there is too much risk to not try to cure a disease? If we have a holistic approach to life, who can decide when a condition should be corrected and a life of suffering is too extreme? Who can decide international norms? How do we balance the freedom of research? And some of these principles are the foundation of why in 2013 I co-founded the American University of Sovereign Nations. Our objectives are a graduate education with a flexible schedule, so people can work for requirements at your pace. Decolonized education, celebrate wisdom for each country. Each individual people, meaning population group people, like Apache or Navajo, community and foreign nation can make decisions for themselves. So we offer master's programs and PhD, and we actually have the largest master and PhD program in bioethics in the world. We have 50 students in our PhD program, and at one point 100 in our master's program, now about 60. So how do we try to create global hubs for this? Create forums for people to work. The idea is to create the university in every country in the world through training people. So that's the idea, that replication of a program in every country in the world. So the curriculum can be shared, it can be done in every sovereign nation. And we have some of our graduates in this room on Skype, and MOUs, so we try and develop double degree programs. So, and they can modify it. There's students from 40 countries plus at the moment. About a quarter of our students are indigenous. In June last year we had the first 3 PhD graduates who were Native American. And so that was quite significant because there's not so many Native American doctorates in the world, and certainly not in bioethics.
Why don't you just call it the University of Sovereign Nations? Why American?
Ah, interesting.
Does it make sense to you?
Well, we actually have the accreditation agency, but this is interesting. Because we're in the Americas, that's why. But interesting. We'll come to that discussion later. It's actually that's why AUSN, the A, do you know what the continent you're in? Asia. Africa, Australasia, America. A, University of Sovereign Nations. It already works, you see. So it's actually it's actually sort of been in there already, Carl. If you know the philosophy of my thinking. Okay. So even Antarctica for the penguins is in there. But not.
It sounds better like all of those.
Yes, it does. Thank you. So all around the world, people make moral decisions using a range of ideas, which are not as diverse as each other as the different etiquettes may demand. We want to pursue a good life. So our goals include how do we form a mature society full of well-informed and balanced persons. Bioethically mature means a person or a society that can balance the benefits and risks of alternative choices, options, and make well-considered decisions and talk about it. So there's a website, and you were here, so obviously you found that. So I want to wanted to introduce today this forum. I'd like to move on to, we have a chance for discussion through the conference, but I'd like to get ready for our next speaker, and we're privileged to have Dr. Surden and Dr. Somsak, who are leading experts in Thailand. So I'm going to ask them to come. Dr. Surden, thank you very much.
Go out and then